So everyone is welcome here. No such thing as silly questions, and we are really excited to see you. So who is ready to get their spark back, or maybe to find more joy in their life? If so, you're in the right place. Rachel Marie Martin is an author, influencer, speaker, and founder of findingjoy.net community, reaching millions of people each month. She's also a mother of 7 who's overcome many challenges, including serious financial hardship. And she talks about a lot of this in her book. And she now has a happy and fulfilling life, inspiring others to find joy, to kind of get their spark back. And Rachel is a big believer in the power of the human spirit to overcome, to thrive, and to find deep joy. So I'm very happy to be talking to her tonight. We're going to be talking about Rachel's story and also diving into the book and sharing some strategies, aren't we, Rachel? I think
so. I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you so much for being here, and huge congratulations on your 3rd book. I think this is.
It is my 3rd book, so thank you very much. It's quite an undertaking to write a book. Like you and I were chatting just before we started.
Yeah, and I was, and this is your first. So this is your 3rd book, but it's the first book that is for not specifically for moms.
It is. It's not specifically. My first 2 are definitely mom centric, but this one, I think it's more universal. That kind of feeling, especially post pandemic, post midlife, kind of what's next in life and who am I now? And it's a universal question, not just a mom question.
Sure. And so findingjoy.net, to give it its full name, but your Finding Joy community, is that something you started in the pandemic?
No, actually, I started writing online in 2008 or so, but I tell people all the time, I've been an early adopter of the internet. Back when I was in college in 1995, I was told to get email. And then I moved right into Yahoo groups. And then from Yahoo groups, I started a blog. And then that blog grew into the brand that it is today, including the Facebook community that I have for Finding Joy. And so I like to tell people, or my kids think it's kind of fun that they tell people I'm an OG blogger.
Yeah, old school blogger. And also, yeah, to have such a huge following on Facebook and social media, and you do, and you share so much writing on there. So I think writing a book is one process, isn't it? But every day I can see that you're sharing big chunks of writing and really kind of honest and I think kind of in-depth pieces about your life.
Yeah, I actually do share pretty much every day. I share a lot. My world, I consider that space this very sacred space where people can gather and have a discussion, and where it's raw and authentic. And we don't necessarily have to have all the same viewpoints, but we can love and respect each other, and we can sit at the table. And that Finding Joy community, it's such a gift that I feel honored to be able to facilitate such a space, especially online in a world that doesn't have that space that often.
And so is it a space for purely positivity? Is it about kind of choosing that kind of joy and finding and kind of staying high vibe? Or because I feel like with your writing, you share a lot of the not so joyful stuff sometimes as well.
Which is interesting because people have asked about that with the finding
Yeah.
joy. And I tell them all the time, finding is an active verb. It's like you're doing something. I would say that no, one of the things that it's definitely not is that kind of cliche positivity. It's more, to me, it's the authenticity. It's about the journey that we go through as humans, about the good days and the hard days and the normal days. And those days when you just don't know, what am I going to do next? Or who am I? And I share that because a lot of times we see people on the internet, and we see, especially social media, and you only see this exterior. And I knew very early on, like 2011, that wasn't my calling. My calling was to write about the real stuff that we go through. So I always joke that it's the real, REAL, and that's what I like to share.
Yeah, and I suppose probably a lot of your community have been with you on your journey to date, which is pretty colorful.
That's a very kind way to describe it. So thank you. It has been an interesting journey. I went through a really challenging divorce in 2013, and at that point, I knew I was kind of living a public-private life. That's the way I talked about it. And because I had developed this place of authenticity and congruency with my readers, I ended up sharing about the nuances of being a single mom and going through parenting that way and dealing with kid issues that were really, really challenging. And not only that, fixing my finances, which were a huge issue in my first marriage. So I just decided I'm just going to share about this. And my goal was always to leave somebody with like a spark or hope of positivity, or not even necessarily like that fake positivity, but more that feeling of I'm enough, I'm worthy, I can do this. And that's always been the barometer for which I think, does that get published or do I keep it back?
Sure. Have you ever published anything that you've regretted?
No, actually, no, which is very interesting. I would say if I had anything I regretted, it was when I tried to fit into like what I thought I should write versus what I like to fit into the box. Oh, this is what's popular right now. Maybe I should write that. And when I lost
Mm,
that sense of self or the community, those are the times where I'm like, you know what? I could feel that it wasn't my best writing.
sure. Yeah, that's really interesting because I think quite a few people actually in our community are they're writing already or they want to be writers or like we all share on social media, probably everyone in the group, don't we? And I think that's really important, that idea of being authentic.
Right.
And you know when you get the ick when you're kind of sharing something that's not really you.
Yeah, yeah. I like the word congruency is really
Yeah.
powerful to me. There was an episode of Seinfeld, that the sitcom from the 90s, where one of the characters talked about that at a certain point his worlds collided. And he was one way with his friends and he was one way with his girlfriend, and they wanted to meet. And he was panicking because his worlds were colliding. And for me, the really one of the greatest compliments I can get is when I meet people in real life and they say, "Oh, you're exactly who I thought you would be." Like there's
Yeah.
that congruency. And that is really valuable to me because the internet can give the illusion of having it all together and all of that. And I just wanted to be like, this, I'm just real. That's what I tell people all the
Yeah.
time. It's just me.
Yeah. Just you
Yes.
sharing and supporting millions of people. How would you describe your relationship with yourself now then? And how has that changed since you started writing this book?
Okay. Well, I would say, as a writer in general, especially of this type of content, there's a lot of introspection. So I would say that there is that great part of where I've learned to listen to my own self. So with this book, I was lost and my life was pretty chill. It was pretty balanced. I had fixed my finances. I'd gotten remarried, all this stuff. But all of a sudden I was like, I don't know who I am, right? Like, who am I now? I know who I was. And so I went on this journey to try to figure it out again. And that journey was kind of surprising because what it ended up being was I learned to listen to my own self again. And we live in a world where we listen to everybody else's advice. We're going to make a decision. We go to our friends, they tell us. And then even what we're thinking that we know is right, we're like, maybe I should do that. And for me, that's been the greatest thing, is to be able to not only listen, but to trust my own self again.
Yeah. And you talk about kind of talked about that authenticity, and this book,
Mhm.
like how old were you when you said you lost that spark? And do you think that because previously you said you kind of fixed a lot of things, you'd fixed your finances, you'd fixed relationship issues, do you think there were those stories were still kind of, you were still bringing them into your life now, so that was the kind of losing the spark
I think,
impetus?
yeah, I kind of. I was on an interview once where somebody asked about, as a parent, do you teach your kids to never lose their spark? And I said, no, no, absolutely not, because that's perfectionism. Because
Mm,
life will give you, it's like a wave, it'll be up and down and that ebb and flow and all of that. And the getting your spark back means all of a sudden you realize, you know what? It's that moment where you're like, you know what? I haven't been taking care of myself. I've been just running. I've been on busy, all of that. And so for me, it was, I had kind of gotten to that place. And it was really about 2020, 2021 when I had that realization again. Like, I have been so involved with fixing my life
mm,
that now that it's fixed, the fixed part of it, I needed to figure out how do I, like I was sharing in the beginning, how do I reconcile some of the hard stuff, but how do I go forward too? Where do I put everything? And that's this spark back journey. And honestly, you know, that's one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is to recognize we're gonna get to that place where it feels like it's flickering again, but what's the strategy to reignite it again? And to know that that's just the way life is.
Sure. And so do you think you can be happy? Because it sounds like you were pretty happy, but then you still maybe didn't have the spark.
Yeah, I was happy. I was definitely I was content, I would say is a good word. I
Hmm.
was content. I was there wasn't anything super pressing on me to solve at that moment. But that being said,
Mm.
my business had exploded and it was really people were telling me all this stuff. You should do this, you should do that. Everybody had all these ideas for finding joy. And me, I just started listening to them. Oh, maybe I should do that. But
Mm.
again, it wasn't congruent with who I was. And that's where I would get into them and I would go so far and then I wouldn't jump. I wouldn't do the end process and people didn't understand. And now looking back, I know it's because it wasn't in alignment with who I was. It was me trying to rush ahead to do something somebody else said was great versus having the patience to wait until I was ready.
Yeah, patience is a good word. Not a word
It
that many of
is.
us like, is it, guys? But I think, yeah, very, it's a skill for sure. So
Yeah.
I spoke to you just before we went live, actually. So the book that we're currently reading as a book club is this one, Build the
Mhm.
Life You Want by Oprah and Arthur C. Brooks. And they talk about the four pillars of happiness. This
Right.
is kind of the research, which is, let me make sure I get this right. So family, friends, work, and faith in that order. So if you were looking to work on your happiness, you would kind of start with family, then friends, work, and faith. And I just wondered if you would agree with those pillars, and if so, where's your happiest pillar, and what would be your biggest challenge right now?
Well, I love those pillars. I told you even before, I'm like, I'm going to wait to tell you until here.
Yeah.
What I love about the pillars is that the faith component is in those pillars. I have been reading self-help books probably, I mean, it's probably since high school with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's been in the last 5 to 10 years where there's this this idea of faith that's brought into our books and self-awareness. And to me, it can be whatever you think of as faith, but to me, it's also that level of self-awareness. It's and stepping into that. So for me, the thing that I would say is the best, because you asked that, is it's my family. I mean, I love my family. It's really great. You know, what's interesting is where I feel like it's always the trickiest is going to be friends. And maybe that's because I write a lot about friendship. But I also
Mhm.
believe part of it is because my lifestyle isn't, it's a little atypical. My friends, people see me on television, they see me here, they see me with all the answers. And I tend to be a little bit guarded with friends. And just because I know, I mean, I'm giving all day. And part of it is I sometimes I feel like, wow, I don't have a lot left. I tell people I'm an extroverted introvert. So
Yeah.
there's that. So I really do make an effort and try to put back into my friendships, knowing that it's the thing that will uh I'll probably skip out on the first. Like I
Yeah.
know, like I get so busy, then oops, I forgot about that.
Yeah, sure. So kind of getting intentional about putting
Yes.
the effort in. Yeah. And when it comes to faith, because that actually, because we've had a few book club meetups about this book, since we started
Mhm.
reading it, and faith has been the hardest one for people, I think, generally to
Mhm.
um, maybe kind of understand ways that they could improve it or kind of bring it into their life more if they're not religious, especially. So I wondered if you
Right.
had any advice on that, on just the kind of, or your understanding of faith.
Yeah, I have a couple things with it. It's an interesting word, and I don't know how the book, I haven't read it, talks about it. But for me, it's this introspection. I think that faith as a word in general is having hope in a future that doesn't yet match what your present reality is. It's different than belief. Like I believe that it's sunny outside today here in Nashville because it's it's sunny outside, or I believe that if I have enough gasoline in my car, that I will be able to get where I'm going. But faith often, to me, it's a different concept, it's a different construct. It's having the ability to see something in the future that you might not even know how you're gonna get there. You don't know the steps, but being brave enough to dare to walk there. For me, faith is also a lot of introspection, meditation. It's the
Mhm.
time where I step outside of what the world says I need to do and connect with, higher power at that moment. I really do believe everybody's journey is going to be completely different with that. And it's being willing to say, I wonder what it means for me versus
Mhm.
finding what somebody else says and wondering. It's such an amazing gift that children wonder without worrying about it. They wonder about everything. But as we get older, we lose that because we get told, do this, do that, don't wonder about that. Even our art projects get graded. But wondering opens up doors, it opens up possibilities, it frees up that a linear space into something higher.
Yeah, I love that. What about purpose? Do you believe that everyone has a purpose? Should we all be chasing, like trying to track down what our purpose is if we don't know already?
I believe that we're all here. I don't know if I'm going to say the word purpose, but we each get this one shot at this earthly existence, right? And that's like your spark is there. It's there as long as you're alive. And purpose, what I think is hard about the word purpose is people assume in some ways that it's got to be this giant, noble thing. It could, but purpose might just be the grandmother that waves at the kids who come home from school every day and, greets people. Like the
Mhm.
purpose to me can be very, very simple, or it can be you're going to do something that people will notice. And that's where I think purpose gets blurry, is because I think we tend to assume that purpose means other people notice it, other people know, and all of that, versus sometimes purpose can be quiet. It can be subtle, it can be behind the scenes, and that's just as noble. So I guess in a long way, I'm probably saying I do think we all have there are something in our soul that lights us up, that gives us happiness. And the life journey a lot is kind of figuring out who it is,
Yeah.
what it is, and then settling into it and going after it.
Sure. And I think what you do so well in this book, and I shared some online, some of, like, you talk a lot about asking the questions to find out things like this, isn't it? It's kind of, it doesn't necessarily need to be a specific definition, but just keeping asking questions, and that will help you. It's just self-discovery.
It is, it is. And what's interesting and ironic to me, again, going back to, if you look at little children, we encourage them, ask the questions, but then there comes a point where asking questions can get risky. You ask a certain question, people make fun of you. You ask a question, it says you don't know something. And so we start to shrink down that part of asking questions. But asking questions, there doesn't need to be an emotional charge to it. It can simply be a way of, like, a neutral and almost a fun way of figuring out what we do like and what we don't like.
Sure. So I've got one more question for you before we go into the book, and
Okay.
this is for our Brits, really. I think it's how do we find joy in autumn and winter, as we're going into autumn now, and we're all preparing to start moaning, or
Oh,
already are.
well, I don't live there, but I was sharing with you before that I lived for 42 years in Minnesota, just like in Minneapolis, which is like 6 hours south of Canada, which means that for 6 months we get to be cold. And when winter would come, especially February, it would be, which ironically is my birthday month. So I always thought that was such a bummer, but it would be so cold and or just dreary and miserable. The sun wouldn't come out. And I actually learned to reframe it and to appreciate the times where I don't have to be as busy, where I get to stay home, where I get to be in the house, where I get to kind of do that self introspection part. Now the reason I figured that out is for 6 months of my life, I lived in sunny San Diego, California, where it only is sunny. And after about a month of it, I actually started to miss the cloudy days,
Mm.
because And I'm sure you have this. When it's sunny, you're like, we got to do something. We have got to go outside. It's time.
Yeah.
We've got to be busy.
Take all
So
our
I was,
clothes off.
yeah, like enjoy it. Like you feel like it. And in some ways, the long winter, to quote Laura Ingalls Wilder, I tend to think this is the time where it's less about being busy and going out and doing stuff, but it's more about, okay, like rebuilding and I don't know, just figuring out what we love. And I absolutely sometimes do love a snowy day, but then there's other times where I don't really like it, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think from a self-care point of view, it's kind of reminding ourselves that it's like we should be doing a bit less when the weather's like that and not being expecting to be as productive all year round.
Right. Right. That is so true, because we live in a culture of where it's productivity. And one of the things I learned with going into my meditation practice is, on the outside, meditation doesn't look productive at all. It looks like, what are you doing? But it is in some ways the most productive thing that I do, because it helps reset everything.
Sure. Do your kids know that you meditate? I'm sure they do. Or do you talk to them about it?
They do. They all do. I meditate at home, and then I also I'm a part of a meditation group or class that meets once a month. And they know I'm leaving on Tuesday nights for that, and I come back a couple hours later. And what I love about that group is, this is part of the soul's journey, is we all will do like a meditative practice, and then when we're done, we'll go around the circle, we'll share what insight we had. And then when I would be done sharing, I would just say that I was done or something. And then everyone would say, thank you for sharing. And then it would be the next person. It was no longer, oh, here's what I think. And because of that process, all of a sudden I started to cut through my own chatter. And that was where I started to be able to hear my own self again.
Wow, that's amazing. What, because you didn't feel like you were responsible in that space, but you
Right.
don't need to hold that space.
Right. And I could hold the space for the friends in the group that would
Yeah.
share something, but I didn't, and love them for what they share, but there was no need for everybody to fix it. And
Yeah.
I really think a lot of times we want things fixed versus allowing a person to go through the process to figure out what it is, if they need to fix something, and or if not.
And then, and just going back to the kids again, because I know tonight we're going to be talking to non-parents as well, but it's so important, isn't it, to be modeling the behaviors that you want them to, and the values that you want them to grow up with.
It is. I've done many interviews, and September was like National Self-Care Month in the States. And I would get asked, well, what's one of the reasons it's important? And I said, well, first of all, one of the things with self-care is, when you take care of yourself, you inspire and encourage your friends to take care of themselves, but you also model to your kids. It's so important. If they see me burn out and I'm not taking care of myself, it's just a generational cycle. So I definitely agree that investing in self is such a beautiful example for our children.
There you go, everybody. Permission to take care of yourself, please, and be a good influence on everybody around you. Rachel, let's talk about the book then. So get your spark back. Would you be able to describe this book in one line for us, 1 or 2 lines? Is it possible?
Well, I'm going to just use the tagline about how to find happiness and reignite your life, which took forever to figure out, which is an amazing thing. When you write a book, you're like, how come that could take so long? But I really believe that's it, because happiness has kind of been one of those places that a lot of us believe we're not worthy of. Life has been a certain way, or we think that when I get this accomplished, then I can be happy. And I wanted to reclaim happiness. I wanted to I didn't want my kids to say she was a good mom, but not happy. And then the reignite your life, it's just about that kind of moment where you wake up and you're like, okay, I am glad to be alive today. And what can I do today? And that is what this book is.
I love it. Some of the questions I shared, I'm going to actually ask the question now.
Okay.
For the people watching, because I'd love to see, you can answer this as well, Rachel, seeing it's your interview, but I'd love to hear from people in the chat box as well. Here's some of the questions which Rachel calls fire starters. So these are questions like designed to kind of get you thinking about things to help you get your spark back. So what did you give up doing in the last 5 years? I think that's a good thing to think of, isn't it? Last 5 or 10 years, maybe,
Mhm.
let's say. And I suppose the idea of that question, Rachel, is to kind of think about what you were doing and why have you given it up? Because probably I bet that's time, money, energy.
Yeah, and I really believe that a lot of times we ask, "What am I gonna do in the future too?" But I was like, sometimes it's good to look backwards. I
Mm,
honestly, it's a kind of a scary place to look back, especially if stuff is messy. Like for me, looking back at my divorce and all of that. But you don't heal when you ignore. And so I knew that. And so even looking back, like, what did I give up? It could be a great thing I saw in there about drinking or that, or it could be something that you love that you gave up.
mm,
For me, I mean, I'm a piano player, I've played since I was 5. And when I look at the periods of my life where I kind of was a little bit dimmer, it's when I didn't invest the time to play piano, because piano was a
yeah.
gateway to my soul. Music is at that spot. And if I look back, I could see, you know what? I stopped playing piano. So that made
Mhm.
me realize I need to make that a priority again.
Yeah, and then you can maybe see patterns in, like you say, in
Yeah.
times that you were feeling good and on top of things.
Yeah,
Um,
patterns are a powerful thing when you can start
yeah.
to see like, oh, I did like that, or you can see the cyclical nature of things, and then you can decide, is this a pattern I want to continue or do I want to shift it?
Yeah, love it. Yeah, Jen's given up. She says music, sad face. There's lots of ways to play
Yeah.
music, Jen.
Music is such a interesting thing. My parents invested,
Mm.
I mean, a lot of money, I'm sure, to giving piano lessons for me, but also time and their ears when I was terrible. And they would all those years, and then eventually I ended up really liking it. And I was thinking, how sad in some ways to invest that whole childhood into music, into piano, and then for me just to just kind of let it go, knowing that it had lit me up. And that's one of the things these questions are designed like, what was that?
Yeah,
Was there something that you loved way back then?
yeah, absolutely. I love it. And another question for everybody is, have you written a bucket list? And what are some things on it that you haven't ticked off yet? Because I like that, because that's like a future thinking, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I love the bucket list question. Again, it's one of those places where it seems cliche, but if you don't actually write it down and you don't
Yeah.
actually do the work, it's just nebulous. But putting something on paper, giant. It's a huge moment because you're basically saying, I'm owning this thing right here. And I love looking at the bucket list that I have from when I was 20 and then allowing myself to reevaluate it as being almost 50.
Yeah, that's amazing. And also, I always say to people, if you put it in the chat box, then it has to happen, because you are like,
Right.
you're writing it and you're kind of like announcing it, aren't you? And a few people have
Right.
written it just now, have kind of said, I don't know why I gave this up, I'll have to think about it now. And you're right, it's like, ask the questions and then writing down the answers rather than getting them out of your head is so important.
Right. And wondering why you gave it up, it just opens up doors. Like it could have been, well, I got really busy or I got this new job. And then, when you think going back to the music analogy, if music is the place where I can tap into my soul, tap into my creative thinking, where
Mm,
I can just be my authentic self, then it would be like, wouldn't I want that back? And yet I had
yeah,
pushed it out because I was too busy for it. And that's what those questions help with.
sure. And I bet everybody, we can all relate to being too busy, right? Things just slide.
Yes.
So it's about prioritizing them. So why did you write this book, and who did you write it for?
I wrote this book because the number one question I got on my website was, how do I get my spark back? And like
Mm,
I said in the little interview that I did for this, nobody would say, how do I get a spark? It was always my, and it's such a vulnerable, beautiful question because it means that you're being willing to say, I want that vibrancy back in my life. And when the universe gives you a question like that, you either choose to listen to it or you choose not to. And the abundance of emails that I got asking about it, I knew I was ready to write a new book at that point. And I had gone through this journey where my readers saw me change my life. They saw me all of a sudden get this joy and happiness back. And that's what created the question. And that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah. And did everybody just hear that Rachel said an abundance of emails? I love that as a frame for a lot of emails or a full inbox.
Yes,
So that's how
yes.
we do it. Its language is so important, isn't it?
It is, it is. And I have learned to be very, very grateful for the emails or comments on my website, because
Mm,
I know that somebody took a portion of their 24 hours of their day to invest in what I've written. And I feel like the greatest honor I can give is to respond, to try my best to meet them where they are and to be grateful.
sure. And so getting your spark back and is a process, and the book kind of
Mhm.
follows that process. It kind of guides us. It's a guide, really, isn't it, to that? So what would you say is your was your favorite part of the book to write? And then was there a part that was challenging, was more
I
challenging?
have, yeah, yeah, definitely. I have, my favorite was about being a beginner. Again, a lot of times in order to ever share anything, you have to go through that process of being a beginner. Like, you have to go through that uncomfortableness. It's about embracing uncomfortable, because when you're uncomfortable doing something, it really means you're doing something versus thinking about it. So I loved writing about being a beginner, because I knew that a lot of times we get stuck in the beginning spot. We don't want to be the new person in the class. We don't want to be the one that doesn't know. We don't like that feeling of working out and then we're
Mm,
sore. So we back up with it. The hardest chapter for me to write was the one about the green shorts and letting go. Because, and honestly, truthfully, I struggled with that chapter over and over, and I finished it the day that it was to be submitted, because in that chapter, I talked about the really hard stuff in life that that people go through. And I knew with beyond a shadow of a doubt, I didn't want to come across as cliche, because I knew that there were stories that were so much more complicated or difficult or different than what I had. And I didn't want to just put this like, well, just let it go answer on it.
mm.
I wanted to be very intentional and honoring of everybody's journeys about what they're processing with and the concept of time. And I really believe that healing, everybody gets their own timeline, and it's not anybody's right or job to superimpose someone else's timeline of healing. And that timeline is there, and it's loving and supporting and being there, but honoring that journey.
Sure. And have you had feedback on that chapter from people?
Uh, yes, a lot actually.
Yeah.
Partially too because people resonate with things from the past that they hold on to. I actually have the green shorts here because I saved them. But in
What
that
is the
chapter,
story? Can you tell it? Can you tell us? Yeah, the kind of the headline.
yeah, so I share about that. I have this pair, I'm a runner. So I have this pair of green shorts that I would go running. And in 2022, for reference, I ran 1,000 miles, and which is a lot. It was a lot of running. But I would run, and I would come home from running, and I would try on these green shorts, and I would get really frustrated. They were like the barometer of my success. Like, if I could fit into the green shorts, it was a great day. If I couldn't, I would be cranky. And at a certain point one day, I was upstairs in my closet, and I threw the green shorts on the ground and took a picture and wrote about it, because I realized that those green shorts didn't represent who I was now, because I owned those shorts 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I went through my divorce. And I was very, very, I was in my healthiest place. I had lost
Mm,
a lot of weight, and I somehow expected this healthy, vibrant me to fit back into these shorts, and they didn't pair up. And I wrote about what I had accomplished since I used to wear them. And the whole point was that sometimes we have these benchmarks that I'm like super proud of the green short me from the past, because she did a lot of hard stuff, but I don't want to go back to being the person that fits into them. I don't want to go through that spot again. And so I knew I needed to let them go and embrace where I am now.
yeah, and it's to keep hold of them as well. It's a kind of it's a great to have
Yeah.
that visual clue, that
Yeah, there
cue
they are.
still there,
Yep.
but meaning something different now. Like you've given
Right,
them a
right. They're
different
not upstairs
story.
in the closet. They're in the
Yeah,
box in my office.
yeah. And what did writing this book teach you about yourself? Because I know a lot of times when people are writing, especially self-help books, you
Mhm.
go into it with a mission and an objective, but quite often you'll find out things along the way.
Uh, that a lot of times I based worth on uh externals, and that I really believe that I learned that you live worthy. You just are of doing hard things, and you can do things, and you're stronger than you think. And for me, it really taught me that all the stuff that I thought was impossible or uncomfortable, it's the going back to the beginner, is if I just say yes and I try, then great things can happen. And the question that I started to pose in the book and through the process was, what will I regret more? Will I regret doing this, or will I regret not doing this? And that's a very simple question, but oftentimes the answer is almost immediate, and it can kind of propel us to take the steps forward that we thought we couldn't do.
Sure. And I'd love to go into now, if you kind of like just more on the idea of like our spark and kind of losing it and getting it back, and maybe some strategies and some advice from you. Obviously not giving away all the book, but just some pieces from it. And guys, if you have any questions, then put them in the chat, just because we're going to have about 10 minutes or so left. So I want to make sure that we get everybody's questions answered if they have any. So when we talk about our spark, then we've referenced it a little bit, and you talked a bit about when you decided you needed to kind of get it back. But what in your community and with all the people that you speak to, mostly women, I think, are there general themes for why we lose our spark? Is it age?
Yeah, I would say age. I mean, myself, I'm approaching midlife. So you have that moment of like, whoa, where even though it says midlife, I mean, that would mean I get to live to be 100, which would be quite incredible to be able to live that old. So there's that spot of, oh my goodness, I don't know who I am or what am I going to do? Or, when you deal with stuff that you don't expect in your life. I have said for years that no child, when they graduate from high school, or would say that one of their life goals was to get divorced when they're 40. Like, we just don't have it, even despite the statistics, but it's still there. So we still have these things that we deal with that are really hard. So we get too busy. We hit midlife. We start to just think it is what it is. Like, you know what, I'm just here. I can't do anything. We worry that we're too old. There's all these little nuances. And the book, originally, when I wrote it, I wrote these little clever chapter titles, because as an author and writer, we're like, oh, that's cute. And my editor, and then underneath it, I wrote a question. And my editor came back and she said, why don't we just make the chapters the question that you're answering? And so now each chapter is all of those questions. Like, what if I'm rejected? Or what if I don't have enough money? All the things that we tell ourselves, I can't find it, or it's impossible.
Sure. So that's how we lose it. How do we get it back? Where do we start?
First of all, it's as soon as you ask the question, that's like the beginning. That's the risky part. That's the most vulnerable spot, is saying, hey, I want to do it. And then getting it back actually involves choosing choosing yourself again, because it's very easy to push yourself off to the sidelines, but deciding, I'm going to invest in myself. Now, there's going to be somebody listening or watching that says, well, I don't even know what I like anymore. And that's okay. I just want to say it's okay. And because you get to choose yourself, your journey is, I get to discover what I like again. I get to do that process. And in the process of choosing self, that wondering, you try new things. You put yourself in different spaces. You decide, well, maybe I'll walk, or maybe I'll run, or maybe I'll start that cooking class. It's allowing yourself to open the doors of possibility in your life.
Sure. And I was going to ask, actually, what are the biggest, I suppose, obstacles or challenges for people? And like you say, for lots of people, it's like, it's not knowing yourself, I suppose. It's just you haven't given yourself permission to ask questions like that. Like, I suppose if you spent many years looking after kids, or kind of climbing the career ladder, or doing all these other things, to actually realize what you want and need and like is sometimes a struggle, isn't it?
It gets pushed down, which I was kind of one of the reasons I think the spark is such a good analogy for your soul. Is it gets kind of like a box put over it. You need to do this, and then you need to do this, and then you need to do this. But your true self, that part of you that's going back to playing piano or dancing, I saw that. We tell ourselves, well, that was for when I was younger, or that's not practical. without realizing that that might be what we're meant to do or who we're supposed to be. I give an example in the book about a friend of mine who when she was in younger years was an actress in like many high school plays and stuff like that, and then kind of put it away, did like the stuff that you thought you were supposed to do. And then all of a sudden, it was kind of around COVID or just before, she just decided, I want to act again. And then now has ended up becoming a full-time actress. And she's like in her mid 40s. And I think it's so inspiring because age doesn't need to define the potential of what we can do.
No. And I suppose we can always find excuses, don't we? I mean, are you a tough love kind of self-help guru? Or
I would say I really believe that you need to be accountable to yourself. But I also believe that when we're too tough love, we don't give ourselves grace for the moments when we stumble, because you are going to get off track. Like if you go back to that year where I ran the 1,000 miles, people will ask me, well, how did you do that? And I tell them, well, it was choosing each day to do 3 miles, knowing that if I quit, I didn't do it that day, then I'd have more. And then there'd be times where I got off track. And the hardest thing is when you get off track is starting again. But if you wait, every single day you wait makes it even harder to start again. And so in that place, I'm like, okay, what can you do today to start? Or developing a strategy where you're like, alert, alert, I'm off track. I need to go back and doing it. So I would like to say I'm a balance of both.
Great. And how do we know when we've got it back? Like, what does it feel like? It just, if people are now and in that place of like, I can't even remember.
Yeah, I think it's simple. It's really simple. It's like you and I were talking in the beginning with is it David? Is that right?
Yeah.
About how he was outside and he noticed the sun was shining, and you have that moment of realization that life is good. And it can be something simple like the sun, or a very beautiful cup of coffee, or the way the violins sound in one of Vivaldi's pieces of music, or something like that, where I mean, it gave me goosebumps talking about it. It's that moment when you allow yourself to feel happiness and joy, because we tend to stifle it with expectations. And we tend to say, when I get everything fixed and my life in order, then I can feel it. But time will just keep going. And it's about experiencing life within the construct of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said earlier, like you touched on earlier, it's patience, isn't it? And sometimes then you kind of one day you look up and you feel different.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you just kind of have that intuition, that feeling of knowing of, okay, where you get that really great full breath and you're like, okay, this is good.
Yeah.
Or a friend or a stranger that you see, and you just share a moment. And when we can start to celebrate the beauty in those simple things in the ordinary, it's really what fuels that spark.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we're good. That's like a beautiful place to end, because I think finding that is your one of your key messages, isn't it, Rachel? Like finding the joy in the everyday and the ordinary.
It is, because I really believe that we can't default on our own stories. We can't default on that emotion. We feel so much stuff on this side. And when we step into that vibrancy of joy and happiness and content and goodness and kindness, then we shouldn't wait on it. We shouldn't wait. We should be willing to go after and seek it out.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for sharing the questions throughout. David's shared some links to the book, Get Your Spark Back, and the Facebook community, and Rachel's Instagram and everything. So yeah, we really appreciate your time, Rachel, and thank you for writing the book, and good luck with everything.
Thank you. It's a very lovely community. I loved reading the comments in between, and I appreciate each one of you, and I appreciate you as well. It was so nice to have a conversation. So thank you.
Well, wonderful to have you here. Thank you, guys. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.